live and recording. Hello, everyone. Thank you so very, very much for joining us. Now, as you all know, it is October, one of the best months out of the whole year, and we are getting to celebrate two very appropriately atmospheric books. And if you look to my direct side, left or right, depending on where you are, but in the center panel, we have Emily Arsenault, and we are celebrating When All the Girls Are Sleeping. I feel like with the font on the book, you have to say it that way with how like it curls and everything. And yes, the cover, the Vanna White moment, it is a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous cover. And this just recently came out, so y'all are in for a treat getting to hear about When All the Girls Are Sleeping. And joining her in conversation is going to be Katrina Leno, who is on the opposite side. And she has the fabulous skeleton earrings. And both of you guys have such good covers for your books. But the paperback actually just came out of Horrid, which is another great read for the season as well. Now, just to give you a tiny, tiny, tiny little taste, When All the Girls Are Sleeping is, we are in a school and there is, I believe she's called the Winter, what is it? The Winter Girl, the Winter Woman?
Right.
And there we go. And she doesn't seem like a very nice person. And people go missing, potentially dead, on like a yearly basis. Not so great. And our main character, though, her friend actually passed about a year ago, where you pick up with her. And she starts to uncover and dig in and find things and uncover the history of what is potentially going on. And of course, I'm not going to tell you what that is. You have the book to find it out. It wouldn't be very fun if I told you. And then for Horrid, which is another good spooky read, I actually have one of the quotes for the books because I was like, it's just a good quote. And when you find a good quote, you got to share it. But it says, from the author you must not miss comes a haunting contemporary horror novel that explores themes of mental illness, rage, and grief, twisted with spine-chilling elements of Stephen King and Agatha Christie. Which I couldn't say it better than that. So that's and on that note, some of the house rules for all of you. Shout out to Tiffany in the comments section. Hello, Tiffany. So as y'all know, the comment section chat is to the right hand side. And if you look down below, you will see that lovely button that says ask a question. If you have any questions for authors, make sure you ask them. Best part about events is that you get to interact, you get to poke the mysterious brain of an author and ask how they came up with all the amazing things that you discover in their stories. And then also, if you look down, there'll be a beautiful purchase book button. And if you click on that after the event, you can go and purchase a copy of When All the Girls Are Sleeping, as well as Horrid. And you will get and personalized book plate with that. So on that note, we're done with the formalities, and I am going to go ahead and pass you off to Emily and Katrina, and I will see you all at the end of the event. Bye!
Thank you. Okay. So we decided that we'd start by each just giving a few sentences overview of what our book is. So did you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So Horrid is about a girl named Jane who lives in Los Angeles, and when her father passes away unexpectedly, and all of a sudden they learn that her and her mother are in a lot of debt, and they actually can't afford to live in their house in Los Angeles anymore, and they have to move across the country to an old manor home that belongs to Jane's mother. And nobody wants to move there, but they kind of have been, thrust into a pretty terrible situation with Jane's father passing away. And so they pick up and they move across the country into a very creepy house. And very quickly, some spooky things start happening. So it is a classic haunted house book, or is it? I really love the haunted house genre, and like a little bit cozier, or cozier being like, not super scary, but just kind of fun to read, on a fall night when you want to be a little bit spooked. And yeah, that's Horrid. Emily, what about you?
Sure. I wanted to add that I just really loved Horrid, and I read it right when it came out which I was around the time of the election, and it was just a great escape for me to. I mean, it was a whole year ago when the hardcover came out, and it was just a nice, cozy read. I really loved it. But anyway, When All the Girls Are Sleeping takes place also in a sort of a haunted building, but a different type. And so it takes place at a girls' boarding school where there's one particular dormitory called Dearborn Hall. It's the senior dormitory at the school that is thought to be haunted. And the ghost, a lot of the girls call the ghost the Winter Girl because she only seems to haunt around January, February. Not every year, but when she does haunt, that's when she haunts, supposedly, at least according to the stories. And the premise is that the main character of the book, Haley, she's a senior. So she lives in the hall now, but the year before, her friend Taylor died in Dearborn Hall under somewhat mysterious circumstances. She either fell out of a 4th-story window, or she jumped, or possibly she was pushed. The school administration pretty much blame it on drugs. They think she was doing drugs up there and she was out of her mind and she jumped out the window. But Haley doesn't really buy that story. She's not really sure what happened, partly because when it happened, she and Taylor weren't friends anymore. So she also kind of has some guilt about that. They kind of had a friend breakup right before this happened, or a couple months before it happened. But now it's about a year anniversary of Taylor's death is coming up. And a few things are happening. Haley gets a little bit of information that she didn't have before that makes her want to take a second look, not only at Taylor's death, but also at the ghost stories about the hall that she previously never really took seriously. But she's starting to get the feeling that maybe she should take them a little more seriously. There's some odd things happening around old Taylor's old room. And she's starting to get a creepy sort of feeling about the dorm and her experience there herself. So she kind of starts an investigation into not only her friend's death, but this building and, what is really happening with this building. Is it haunted, or is there something that the school administration maybe is trying to hide about its history?
And I actually had the really distinct pleasure and honor of blurbing the book. So I'm on the back. I can vouch for this book. I loved it. I think one of my favorite things about it has a really cool countdown effect. No spoilers, but it is really like a driving force through the book. So it's very hard to put the book down because it keeps, every time you reach the end of a chapter, you're like, oh, but I need to just read a little bit more. So it's a really quick read. It really sucks you in. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, of course. Do you want to ask the first question?
Sure. So we had decided that we would each ask a question, but not only would the other person answer it, but then we'd answer it ourselves. So they're kind of broad questions that apply to both of our books. So the first question I had was, we both seem to write about young women who are haunted in more ways than one. That is, there's the element of ghosts, along with the element of being psychologically troubled or haunted in the less literal sense. Can you speak to that layer of your book and why you wanted to write about it?
Yeah, so I write a lot about, mental health and especially young girls who are navigating this very, difficult and specific time in a teenager's life when they're kind of on the cusp of adulthood. They're not there yet. A lot of emotions and changes are happening, and Jane has the added kind of thing happen where her father passes away, and so she's trying to process all this grief. She's definitely struggling with depression, and she's definitely struggling with an anger management issue that often presents itself when she's feeling overwhelmed, or when she's feeling scared, or when she's feeling anxious. She gets really angry. And I think, in historically speaking, women have often been called crazy or dismissed as not being believable sources as to their own experience. And I think, often women aren't believed about their pain. They're not believed about, assaults. They're not believed about a lot of things that they experience. And it's really, it's been kind of prevalent throughout history just to be like, oh, she's crazy. I mean, we've all heard it. Like, a guy breaks up with a girl, she's crazy. There's this kind of like, repetitive narrative. And so I think it lends itself well to exploring the space of mental health, which I always like to talk about because mental health is something that's really important to me, and it's in, basically everything I write.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also cool because it gives you a chance to write a really unreliable narrator.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this case, Jane is, how much can we really believe in what she's like seeing and experiencing, because she is going through this big trauma, and she is processing her father's death, and she is dealing with her own mental health issues that are a little bit out of control at the moment. And she is dealing with this huge upending of her life, and she's moved away from her best friend, and she's in a new town she's never been to, 3,000 miles away from the only place she's ever known. And so there's this huge kind of external events that are really messing her up. And that, coupled with her own mental health, I think it makes it so that you're never quite sure what's happening, which in Gothic horror is, a pretty common sort of trope. Like, what's real, what's not real? Is this a simple case of a haunted house, or is this, I think the blurb on the back says, like, is this mental health grief, or something more sinister? So
Mm-hmm.
that to me is really interesting to examine, like, mental health, the grieving process, and all set against the backdrop of a creepy haunted house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that I loved how your book had that element of the haunted house, and just that constant question of how much it's really haunted and how much of it is Jane, because Jane is very clearly trying, like a lot of girls that age, trying to keep it together. But you can tell there's just this layer of vulnerability that's just right there beneath the surface the whole time, and you're just not quite sure when it's going to come out, and what's going to happen when it comes to the surface.
Yeah, definitely. I think the same in your book as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think my character Haley, she's obviously haunted also by a death, and that's the death of her friend and the guilt that goes along with that. But in addition to that, I wanted to have this character who, even before her very conflicted friendship with Taylor, before she even came to this school, she was already pretty damaged. She was very unsure of herself, and this school and this friendship offered her an opportunity to just kind of forget about all that. But she's finding, like, as she's coming to the end of her time at the school here, or she's especially vulnerable in this time in this dorm, or without Taylor, the kind of younger teenage self that she was before she came to this school is something she can't really turn away from. That's very much a part of her still. And I find myself writing about these themes a lot, even in my adult books. In fact, this is one of the reasons I started writing YA, is because people pointed out to me that my characters were kind of adolescent even when they were adults, or that they kept harkening back to issues they had as a teenager. So people would often be like, why don't you just go ahead and actually write about teenagers? But this idea of emotional survival when you're that age, that you do just about anything you can to survive emotionally, and sometimes that means really misguided relationships or bad decisions, and that potentially come back to haunt you over and over again. And I just like writing about that. It's just a theme that comes up for me a lot. So And this book is no different.
Yeah, and this is your first young adult book, is that right?
No, it's my third young adult book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that young adult is compelling for me for that reason too. Like, there's just so much going on at that age, and I can, I'm certainly not a teenager anymore, but I can get myself back to that kind of age so quickly and remember so vividly how hard it is. And you said something about like them being haunted, and it actually that like leads into my next question, um which is like we both have these haunted places and these haunted girls, but the setting of our books are both really important. Mine takes place at a creepy old house called North Manor in Maine, and yours takes place at the school. And so I was wondering, have you ever visited a haunted place before? And do you even believe that a place can be haunted?
I definitely believe a place can be haunted. I'm not really 100% sold on ghosts, like that dead people come back and harass you in your house if you live in a haunted house. But definitely the idea of there being potentially like that a place can have bad energy or just energy that's lingering from something that happened there, or just mental tension. I just think there's a lot to those kind of theories. There might just be things we don't totally understand about what's going on with our brains and how it affects things around us. Ghosts I'm a little more on the fence about, but I guess your original question was if I visited a haunted place. And I definitely have a lot of examples of yes. Like, I haven't sought out ghosts, like, oh, that's a haunted library, let's go and check it out and see if there are ghosts there. But like, I've definitely had experiences of places feeling haunted. And most directly related to the book is that when I was in college, there was one particular dormitory. I went to Mount Holyoke College, which is a women's college, and it's a fairly old school. But there was one particular dorm that everybody talked about as being haunted, that everybody felt that was the most haunted dorm in the school, although there were several buildings that people talk about as being haunted. But the thing that was distinct about this one hall, it was called Wilder Hall, was that on the fourth floor, there was this room that was always kept locked. And nobody really knew why it was kept locked. So it was really, there were just a lot of stories about that room. And I think it was just like an unfinished, awkward room that really was not livable for students. But like, I don't think I knew that at the time. So I very much ate up the stories, and students would say they would hear noises back there, or just even particularly in that that floor of the dorm, that women would report, just odd experiences, like waking up to a presence or just feeling very cold all of a sudden, although these dorms were really poorly heated. So just because they're such old drafty buildings, so there's that. But that's the haunted place I've been to that was very much an inspiration for when all the girls are sleeping. I pretty obviously just took that building and kind of ran with it, because Taylor's room is so much a central part of the story. And the fact that, in this case, everybody knows why it's locked. It's because there was a death there, but there's also this feeling like nobody really wants to talk about it, or the administration of the school just locks the door, and the students are kind of just left to deal with the questions about it. So
that's really cool. It feels like such a fully realized place in the book. So I think that's very cool that it's because it is a fully realized place and you kind of, had some experience around that. I don't really have experience with haunted houses. I did grow up in New England, and I've always loved really old, kind of spooky colonials. And there are plenty of them in New England. So I modeled, North Manor on like what I imagine a quintessential New England haunted house would be. And I'm not really sold on ghosts or haunted places, but I do think that energy is really strong, and as we know, it can't be created or destroyed. And so, I think there's an interesting question there about what does it mean when you walk into a place and it gives you the creeps, or like, what does it mean when you're sitting in a room alone reading a book and all of a sudden you get uncomfortable or a little bit scared or a little bit like uneasy. I kind of am more inclined to believe it's some parallel universe crossover, like maybe the other Berenstein Bear universe is getting a little bit too close to ours and we're fighting about how to spell it. Um, but I think there's so much we don't understand about the world that there's kind of limitless possibilities when it comes to can a place be haunted? I think definitely, but by what is maybe a more interesting question that I don't know the answer to.
Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if the manor in your book was inspired by an actual place.
No, it's kind of like maybe an amalgamation of many places. I kind of pictured it in my head um, based on all these old creepy houses, but like a very, symmetrical, like I think there's a fireplace at either end of it. So just like a big dilapidated um, old spooky house, but none in particular. So you can't go visit it, unfortunately.
Did we want to move to another question?
Sure.
Is it my turn? Yes, I think
Yeah.
it was. Oh, so we both have pretty twisted endings. So the question was if you knew from the very beginning that that's how it would end, or did it come to you as you were writing?
So don't worry, we've agreed to do no spoilers. So I am what's known as a pantser in the writing world, which means I just start writing having absolutely no idea of the plot, and it is a genuinely pleasant surprise if I get to the end of the book and there's a plot there, because sometimes I get to the end of the book and there's no plot, and then I have to start over, or I have to go back and do a lot of editing. And Horrid, I really just had this idea of little girls who are eating things that they're not supposed to, and that was kind of the idea that got me into this world. And the very, very end, like the last 2 pages of the book, I came up with as I was writing them. Like I knew the general layout of the last chapter, the last 2 chapters, by the time I got around the middle of the book, but the very last 2 pages were kind of a surprise even to me. And I'm really happy with how they turned out. And we did a lot of work and a lot of rewriting of the last chapter, but not the last like 2 pages. Those are kind of they ended up as they were written, which was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I mean the last few pages of your book really stuck with me because I just wasn't expecting it, and it was kind of. See, I don't want to say anything to it. Just
Right.
having read a lot of YA, I guess I was expecting something different, but I was really happy with what it was. I don't know if happy is the right word, but it just
Right.
it just struck just the right chord. So.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
People either love it or they hate it, and you know what? Either is fine with me because different people like different things. But I think most people like it, so that's nice.
Yeah, I would think. But as I said, with YA, sometimes it's kind of like certain genres where people just are expecting a certain thing.
Yeah.
If they don't get it occasionally, people, have difficulty dealing with the surprise of something kind of being a little bit of a departure of what, those types of books usually do. But
Right.
I can certainly relate to being a pantser. Usually I think I know the ending since my books are pretty much all suspense. You have to have some sense of how you think it's going to end to kind of carry you through the first draft. And I usually think I know how it's going to end, but I occasionally, 3/4 of the way through the first draft, change my mind, and that can be a problem. And there's just a lot of revision involved if you do it that way. But this was a fairly rare book for me in that I always knew how it would end, and I really didn't consider changing my mind. Like, I don't think I could have done this book with a different ending. So it was a kind of a rare experience for me. It required just as much revision because I think the nature of the ending, it was just really difficult to do it in a way that was fair, where that I always felt like if I provided any clue at all, that the reader would just know everything. You know what I mean? So it took several drafts to find the right clues that felt like they were fair and they were doled out in the right, progression, but that didn't just give everything away. I mean, it's always the case with suspense, but I just felt like it was more so with this one. So, what I think I always thought that if I really had it together and I just knew the ending like really solidly from the beginning, it would be a different, more efficient writing process. But I didn't find that to be the case.
Yeah.
It was just as hard.
I will say that the twist in When All the Girls Are Sleeping is intensely satisfying. And I don't often feel that way about twists. Sometimes I feel like they're kind of random and nothing that you could ever see coming. And like an Agatha Christie twist, like some of her twists are, I talk a lot about Agatha Christie and Horrid, and some of her twists are, you could not guess them. You could not read the book again and be like, how did I not get this? Like, they're out of left field. They do not make any sense. They're fun, but I didn't feel that way about your book. Like, it was so satisfying. I was really impressed with the way you did it, and I feel like if anyone is watching and they like a twist, that's the book for you. That's great.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, I've written several suspense novels, and I don't think that has always been the case. I think sometimes for me, some of my books, it's been more about the journey than the twist. But I feel like with this book, it was more about the twist for me, at least as in the writing process. So that's nice to hear.
But the journey is there too, which is good. I feel that way about myself too. My books are definitely more about the journey. Sometimes too much. Sometimes my editors are like, too much journey, not enough plot or ending. But I feel like you nailed both of those. So you have enough.
I feel like with my adult books, I've indulged a bit too much in the journey. I mean, whereas with YA, you really have to stick to the plot a little tighter, I think. I mean, maybe that's a misconception on my part. You've written more YA books than I have, but I just feel like as I've written YA, I've tried to be a little more disciplined about that and not so much navel gazing. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I think that YA, I mean, I've never written an adult book, so I'm kind of like, I can only speak to YA, but to me, like, it has to be a really solid plot at the end of the day, and I do think too much kind of wandering around. I mean, I get called out for wandering around again by my editor all the time. I just like wandering around, so sometimes, I mean, I feel like maybe hopefully people know that about my books already. They're like, oh, this is a Katrina Leno book, she's gonna wander a little bit. But yeah, I totally see what you mean. Like, I feel like a lot of adult books do a lot of wandering. That's how I'm going to describe it from now on. They just wander a little bit.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question for each other, and then
let's do it.
Like, get what we've got for audience. I've seen stuff come by, but I'm not quite sure if I'm seeing all the questions. But whose turn was it?
I think it's my turn.
Okay.
I'll give us a nice, easy one. Did any spooky books or movies or TV shows help to influence your book?
I mean, honestly, for this one, It was more the types of books I read as a kid. The ghost stories I read as a kid were the biggest influence, like Mary Downing Hahn books. I read a lot of those, and The Dollhouse Murders by Betty Wren Wright, books like that, where there was always definitely a ghost. There were a lot of secrets for the narrator. Usually it was a girl narrator to uncover. Often going to the library to look at old newspapers to figure out what was going on with this house. Those types of stories, often, with some family secrets folded in, that I just, when I was 11 or 12, that I could just spend a whole weekend reading the book and not paying any attention to anything else. And that was just my ultimate comfort read. So when I was writing this, I think I was just aiming to create that kind of writing experience that I used to love as a kid, just for a slightly older audience. Not so much middle grade, 11, 12, but just a little older. And I very consciously made space to put in things like the searches in the school archives or interviews with kind of suspect older people, paranormal investigators, creaky old doors and, dusty libraries, just that kind of fall kind of ghostly read. I very much just wanted to write a book like that. So my influences were kind of older, the sort of books I liked when I was quite a bit younger.
I love that. Yeah, I read a lot of creepy books when I was younger, more than I read now. I really grew up on Stephen King. Just scaring the absolute hell out of me, and being quite young to read some pretty scary books. And some of which are so scary that I could not even finish them. I've never finished The Stand. I got halfway through, I read 600 pages of that book, and then I was like, no more. But I had just come off of the book that came out before Horrid. It's called You Must Not Miss. And that was more of kind of I think it was a little darker, and it's a little bit more out there and a little bit more wackier. And then I was kind of wondering what to write next, and I just happened to wander into my library pre-COVID. It hasn't opened up yet, so I'm really hoping it opens again. They have a Friends of the Library bookstore, and they sell books for $1. It's literally heaven. And I walked in one day, and they had this whole stack of Agatha Christie paperbacks for 50 cents each. I bought all of them, and I realized I hadn't read an Agatha Christie novel since I was in high school, and I had read exactly one, and then there were none. And so I read a few of them, and I don't know, I feel I was in the right headspace, just coming off of this other creepy book that I had written and wanting to kind of stay in that creepiness. And then I'm sorry, I just started playing around with this character who's obsessed with Agatha Christie novels. Jane is very obsessed with mystery novels, Agatha Christie novels. And so I kind of came up with her character first, loving these novels. And then, there's one specific Agatha Christie novel that I kind of borrow a plot device from. I can't really say much about it. You find out in the book. But yeah, so a lot of Agatha Christie, and then, some Gothic horror as well. So Shirley Jackson obviously wrote the best haunted house story that's ever been written, The Haunting of Hill House. Surprisingly, I did not read it until after I wrote the first draft. So it influenced my edits, but I've kind of purposefully did not want to read it beforehand because I didn't want it to be too much of an influence. So I read that. I read Mexican Gothic for the same reason after my first draft, because I think unconsciously I was I just don't want too much influence. I feel these books are both going to be amazing, and let me wait a second to read them. And so reading both of those, and then kind of reworking Horrid to take some sort of classic elements from Gothic horror. And then I watched The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, and it is completely different from the book. Like they share a name and literally nothing else. Not a single plot point. And the TV show I found, I'm kind of a scaredy cat, so I found the TV show to be quite scary. But I feel like that also influenced me in another way because it also deals with, you know, quite a creepy haunted house in a very different way than The Haunting of Hill House, the book. So all of those things were kind of like, you know, swarming around in my head during the first draft and then rewrites. And yeah, that's Horrid. It's all in there.
It's interesting that you didn't read Haunting of Hill House till after you were revising it. It just,
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of my favorite books. I had read the other one that I can't remember. We Have Always Lived in the Castle.
oh yeah.
I had read that previously. I had read a bunch of Shirley Jackson's short stories, The Lottery, of course, many others. But I had a copy of Haunting of Hill House, and I just instinctually, I was like, you need to wait on this one.
Yeah.
And then I read it. I mean, it's the most beautiful book. I mean, it's really heartbreaking, such a profoundly moving book. Maybe I was like, don't read it beforehand because it'll be so beautiful that you won't want to write a haunted house book because you like know you won't come anywhere near this book. Maybe that was the little voice in my head telling me to wait.
Yeah, you know, it's true. It's interesting that there have been a lot of adaptations of Haunting of Hill House that aren't very much like the book at all. There was, so I did notice that about the show, but also there was a movie that came out, I want to say in like 2002 or something, and it was around the first time I read the book or was rereading it, and I remember being disappointed that it didn't. But I haven't seen the first movie.
Yeah, me neither.
Maybe
we need to check that out.
Yeah, probably it's a little closer to the original story.
Maybe we should jump into, oh, there's a lot of links to what we're talking about. How clever. All right, let me scroll back to the top and see if there are any questions we should answer. I see one. Did you know each other before this? So no, I met Emily, well, through her at an agent who reached out to my agent to see if I could blurb her book. And I think I was in the middle of writing I was in the middle of revisions for my book that comes out next year called Sometime in Summer, which is not scary at all. So if you don't like scary books, that's the book for you. And you know, I got a blurb request, and so I think I had my agent write back something, you know, like, you know, Katrina's really busy, but like she'll try and get to this. And then I was not planning on blurbing. I was in, you know, edits, and I wasn't planning on blurbing it. And I was like, all right, I'll just read like the first chapter. And then I think I ended up reading half of the book in one night because it really sucks you in. And that's how we met, through books, which is lovely.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's pretty much the story. I mean, I read Horrid before. Obviously, I asked my agent to ask Katrina to blurb the book. I really liked Horrid, so that's what motivated me to. And I did notice there were just some similarities that I thought readers would be interested in. I mean, obviously, the books are very different. I mean, they're both ghost stories, but like the settings are very different, and the characters are very different. But there are some themes that I thought would be similar, so that I thought Katrina might be interested. Okay, so
I found where all the rest of the questions are.
Oh yeah. Oh,
I can keep asking. I can keep asking them. I thought they were on the side, but I found them. They're down below. I can keep going if you want. I have one that says, "Do you have a playlist for your books?" My answer is really easy. No. Emily, do you have a playlist for your books?
I don't really. I mean, strangely, when I'm like in the final stages of editing, this is just going to sound really weird, but I listen to music from the late 80s that I liked at a certain age when I started writing, and it just like pumps me up. I don't know, it's really weird, but
Oh, I love that. That's so cool.
I don't
No,
have
I
like
think that's really cool.
I don't have like a playlist for different characters. I have talked to writers who have that. Like if they're really trying to get into the mindset of a certain character, they have certain songs, but I don't tend to do that.
I love that, actually. I love listening to like writing that kind of brings you back nostalgia. I love nostalgia. Okay, here's another question. What are you reading now? Emily, you go first.
Sure. I'm reading a book I'm really enjoying. It's an adult book. It's called Night Bitch. And it's about a woman she's a stay-at-home mom. She was an artist before she became a stay-at-home mom. And I can't remember the name of the author, unfortunately. But anyway, Night Bitch is a pretty distinct title. But she starts to think that she's turning into a dog. And it's just very unusual, and I love the writing, and it's funny, and I don't really know where it's going, but it doesn't even matter. Like the writing is so fun and interesting. But that's what I'm reading right now.
I love that. I'm gonna look it up. I am reading Jane Eyre for the first time ever, and I'm finding it very, very readable and very good. I just read Anna Karenina this year, which was not so readable. And Tiffany said, I just read Jane Eyre for the first time ever last year. Twinsies. Jane Eyre, late in life is I have a friend who it's like her favorite book, and for years I've had this version I found at my library bookstore that came out in 1948 and has these really beautiful wood carvings, and I've been meaning to read it for a really long time. And after Anna Karenina, which I really slogged through, I was like, all right, maybe I'll try and read Jane Eyre, and I'm halfway through, and it's really great, and it's kind of perfect for spooky season. I know nothing about it, so no spoilers, please. Like everything that happens, I don't know how I've made it this long in life, and I've never read it, but here we are.
And you've made it this long without anyone telling you any spoilers about it?
Yeah, I mean, I know the last line. I guess that's like a pretty big spoiler, but so I mean, I guess I do know a pretty big spoiler, but none of the stuff in the middle, it's all new to me. Let's see here. Do you have to be wounded as a person to write about wounded, insecure people? That's a great question. I will start. I feel like my own depression that I really struggled with when I was a teenager, and to this day, and my struggles with anxiety, which I don't think are ever going to go away. I've learned to live with them as an annoying roommate of sorts. They've really helped inform my writing, and I think, like, for me, they've kind of just like informed what I always want to write about. And I can't lie, that experience of like being very depressed and being really sad a lot of the time, especially earlier in life, definitely has helped me write about people who feel the same way. But I don't know that you have to be. I think, writers are great at writing about things that they have not necessarily experienced. So I would say it is helpful, just like it's helpful to write about, a 36-year-old white girl in Santa Monica. If you're a 36-year-old white girl in Santa Monica, like, obviously I'm going to know exactly what that's like. But do I think, obviously I'm not writing about 36-year-olds right now. I'm writing about teens mostly. And so I have that experience too. And long story short, I feel like it helps if you have this experience of living through a time where you were struggling. That helps, but I don't think it's necessary. But Emily might disagree with me. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I agree that it's not necessary. I feel like most writers I know, there's a reason why they feel consistently like they have something to say, and they have to say it in different ways. And often that does come from a place of being wounded in some way, but I certainly don't think it's necessary. I think there can be writers who feel very healthy and happy all the time, but who have great empathy for other people and are able to put themselves skillfully into the place of characters, who've had more difficult times than them. And, that's part of the exercise, is doing it well and doing it in a way that people can still relate to. I recently had the experience of my last adult book had a character whose father had died when she was at a very young age. And this is not an experience I share, but a neighbor of mine really wanted to read it, and his father had died when he was a teenager. And the things he said to me when he finished were very moving. And I didn't realize until he told me how he felt about it that I was actually pretty nervous about him reading it. And that was just really rewarding to have somebody say those things to me, that they felt like they could relate to this character and they had felt like I had done a good job. To me, that was worth a lot more than a lot of things that like professional critics have ever said about my writing. Just that we could connect on that level, and that he didn't think I had really botched it. So
yeah, that's really meaningful.
Yeah.
Let me pop back in here, and I just want to make sure we answer. Do you have a favorite book of any genre that you recommend to people? I do. My favorite book of all time is The Letters of Vincent van Gogh to his brother Theo. And they're just a collection of letters, as the title suggests, that Vincent wrote to his brother Theo, who at the time was who was kind of bankrolling Vincent, as Vincent, lived in the countryside and painted, but obviously also struggled with a lot of mental illness. And he writes, in my opinion, just as beautifully as he paints. And it's an incredibly moving collection of letters that's also really sad, because we all know how it ends. But yeah, that's a book that I would recommend to anyone everywhere.
That's a tough one for me. I don't think I have a favorite book of all time, because I do kind of skip around a lot in terms of genres. And like I was saying earlier, often what comes to mind are my childhood favorites. I think like I really loved A Tree Grows in Brooklyn growing up, and kept coming back to that book for some reason. I haven't read it in years. So that's a favorite. And then some Margaret Atwood titles come to mind, like The Blind Assassin was just a really great reading experience. I was in the Peace Corps in South Africa years ago with my husband, and the books that I read during that time for some reason come back to me over and over again, and that's one of them, The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. But unlike Katrina, I don't have one book I can point to as an absolute favorite.
I think that's okay. I think having a lot of books are a lot of favorite books. Other than this one book of letters, I could not name a second favorite book. I mean, if you give me a genre, sure, but like of all time, that's hard. That's tricky. Let me scroll down. I think we have time for one or two more. Of all the books you've written, which is your favorite, not including the book that we're talking about right now? So not including When All the Girls Are Sleeping. What's your favorite book you've written?
That's a hard one. I often have difficulty answering that question, but my mind often does go to one particular book, to be honest, even though if I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's sort of, you know how people talk about their heart book, or, you know, the book that's close to their heart just because of some character in it or something. And that's, it's called In Search of the Rose Notes. And it was my second book. And it's about these two girls when they're 11, they both know this babysitter, this older teenager they know, and she disappears. And her disappearance kind of just sticks with them. When they're 11, they try to investigate her disappearance using like techniques they get from the Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown books that came out in the 80s. Like, anyway, they try to use like psychic powers or stuff about ghosts, or anyway, they just try to use these weird techniques to try to figure out what happened to her. And of course it doesn't work. And then the book goes back and forth between when they're 11 and then when they're 27, the girls' bones are found, and they're much older now, looking at the same mystery now, knowing that she was found and she had died. And anyway, I really, really loved writing the 11-year-old girls. And I just always come back to that as, you know, perhaps it wasn't my best plotted book, but it's just the one I feel emotionally closest to.
I love that. I mean, there's always a book that, exactly like you said, is like your heart book. I think for me, my favorite book is kind of always the book I'm working on next. So for me, that's not my book that comes out next year, because I'm quite sick of that book because I've read it 40 times this year in the editing process. So my favorite book is the book I can't even talk about yet because it's not sold or finished. But of my published books, I think the book I'm most proud of is a book called Summer of Salt. And it's about twin sisters who are witches, and they live on a magical island called By the Sea. And the quick pitch is kind of a young adult practical magic, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, certainly. The book is very different. I like the book, but the movie is quite different from the book. So it's a little bit my love letter to the movie. And yeah, I would say Summer of Salt is the book that I'm most proud of, and the book that I feel the happiest about whenever a new reader finds it. It came out a few years ago, and whenever anyone new reads it and reaches out to me and loves it, it really makes me quite happy. Shall we do one more?
Okay.
Let's do one more. Let's see here. What would be your elevator pitch for your current book? I don't know if they mean this book that we talked about. So I feel like we already did that. So I will skip around again. What do you think about the growing popularity in horror we are seeing in the book world? Any thoughts on what has contributed to it? Do you want to go first?
I mean, I might not be so familiar with, like, did horror ever go away? Is it having a resurgence? I don't actually know.
Yeah, I think it's having a resurgence in like in how widely it's accepted as a genre. Like I feel like for a long time it was kind of Stephen King, you know, and he was sort of the big mainstreamer, and other horror novels like weren't taken as seriously. And now you have books like Mexican Gothic that was, you know, a bestseller, and you have books that are, I think, like valued more for their literary merit, which is really incredible to see. Like all genres like that, I feel like, you know, there was a time when like romance books were kind of, you know, not taken seriously and made fun of a little, and scary books and horror books were not taken seriously and kind of made fun of. And even like, you know, crime books or whatever, what have you, any kind of genre. And I feel like I've personally seen like a flip to that in the past, I don't know, like 5 years. Certainly in YA, people are doing really cool book like things with horror and scary books I haven't really seen before. I mean, your book being one of them. The Female of the Species was a really big influence on me when that came out, and especially my book that came out before, Horrid, You Must Not Miss. I mean, I'm terrible under pressure, or else I would name a billion more. But yeah, I feel like, look, the world is a scary place. Sometimes it's nice to escape from the scary place by watching The Kissing Booth on Netflix and, To All the Boys I've Loved Before. But sometimes it's fun to escape the scary place by like reading about even scarier things. I think there's like a lot of merit to that. So I think maybe that's one reason that they seem like horror books have gotten a little more popular lately. And I think that might be our last question we've answered, unless you have any final thoughts, Jad.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, I have two final questions for the both of you, and that one is any upcoming projects that you would like to share with people, and two, can people find you online, whether it be social media or a newsletter or whatever is the best way for them to stay up to date with what you have going on?
Emily, you can go first.
Sure, thanks. I mean, I'm just starting working on an adult book, which takes me forever, so I don't have anything upcoming to share. A book coming out in the near future. But in terms of how to contact me, I mean, I'm not that good at social media, but I'm at least on Instagram, and I do have a newsletter through my website. So,
my book next that comes out in June is called Sometime in Summer. It is a lighthearted, contemporary, a little bit of a magical, feel-good, heartwarming book, not horrid at all. It has a younger YA protagonist, so she's 14, which I was really excited to write because I don't feel like a ton of YA is kind of focusing on like younger teens. It's really, all my books have been about 17, 18-year-olds, and that's great. Obviously, I love that, but I also wanted to like make a space for a little bit younger. So, someone who's dealing with like her first period and like, being a sophomore in high school or freshman in high school. And so that comes out in June. And online, I'm mostly on Instagram at Katrina Leno Books. I'm also on Twitter at Katrina Leno, but I don't use Twitter that much. It's a little bit of a cesspool, and I don't like seeing scary things about the news. And my website is just katrinaleno.com, and it has all my links there. So that's the easiest place to find me if you forget everything I just said.
Awesome. I agree. I like Instagram. It is pretty photos and fun reels of fuzzy cats in my world. And it makes things
what
good.
we all need.
Right?
No news, no scary news on Instagram.
Nope, just all of the fuzzy animal reels.
Exactly.
But thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you very much to Emily for celebrating when all the girls are sleeping. Thank you to Katrina for celebrating the paperback release of Horrid with us. Both just really, really, really great reads that, as you got to see during the conversation, also touch really important things as well that we all go through. So a big thank you to you guys for writing these books and also for sharing with us tonight, and to everyone for joining us and all of your questions. But yep, don't forget you can click the purchase link button down below and get a personalized book plate. And on that note, we will say we will see y'all next time, and have a good night, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.